I always thought military life was predictable, rigid, safe even. But after being stationed at Fort Drayton, things started to feel off in ways I couldn't explain. When I first arrived, it seemed like a standard, sleepy base. There were the usual barracks, the training fields, the administration offices, nothing unusual at first. It was the kind of place you'd expect to see in any movie about soldiers getting through their duty, fighting boredom and waiting for the next big thing. But it wasn't long before I realized there was something wrong here. At first, it was just a feeling, something I couldn't put my finger on. Little oddities that wouldn't have seemed like much if you were any other person. But I wasn't the only one who noticed. Everyone did, even if no one really said it out loud. The way the halls seemed a little quieter than they should be, the lights flickering on and off every so often like they were trying to get your attention without speaking. A strange coldness in certain areas, like a draft that no one could figure out. Even the air felt heavier, like it was harder to breathe in some places. It was one evening, a few days after I arrived, that I first heard about the room. I was talking to Sergeant Mason in the mess hall, and he had this look on his face, like he was thinking about something but didn't want to say it. I asked him what was up. "You're new here, right?" he said, his voice low, like he was worried someone might overhear. "Yeah," I replied. "Just got here a few days ago. Why?" "Don't go near room 23, he said, his eyes darting to make sure no one else was listening. "Just don't." He didn't elaborate, and I didn't press him. But that was the first time I heard about room 23. I brushed it off at first. After all, it was just a room. What was so special about it? I'd never heard of any place on the base being off limits, and I had no reason to think room 23 was anything but another storage closet or supply room. But after that night, it started to feel like I couldn't stop thinking about it. Days went by, and things started to get stranger. One night, after lights out, I was walking back to my barracks when I saw something that made my skin crawl. Just outside the entrance to room 23, there was a soldier standing guard. The weird thing was, he wasn't one of the regulars. I'd seen him around the base before, but he wasn't on duty. His eyes were hollow, like he hadn't slept in days. He wasn't moving, just staring ahead at nothing, his hands clenched at his sides. I was too tired to care much, so I turned to go to bed. But as I passed by, something caught my attention, a low, almost imperceptible hum. It wasn't coming from the lights or the ventilation system. It was coming from behind the door of room 23. I couldn't shake the sound from my mind, so I made a decision I'll probably regret for the rest of my life. The next night, I decided I was going to find out what was in that room. I waited until midnight, when most of the base was asleep, and I snuck down the hallway toward room 23. I was convinced there was nothing to it, just some weird electrical issue or a forgotten piece of equipment. But as I approached, the air grew colder, and the hum got louder. My heart began to race. I reached the door, and for a moment, I hesitated. The door itself was normal, except for one thing. It was locked, but there was no doorknob on the outside, only a small metal plate near the top. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. But the hum was growing louder now, almost unbearable. It was like the walls themselves were vibrating. I didn't know what came over me, but I pushed the plate. To my surprise, the door clicked open. My blood ran cold, and every instinct screamed at me to turn back. But I couldn't stop myself. I had to know what was in there. I stepped inside. The room was pitch black. There wasn't a single light, no windows. It felt as though the air itself was heavier in here, like it was pressing down on me. The hum was deafening now, shaking my bones. My eyes were struggling to adjust to the darkness, but then I saw it faint, barely visible in the corner of the room, a figure. I froze. At first, I thought it was a person, maybe someone who had fallen asleep. But then I noticed how wrong it looked. The figure was sitting perfectly still, unnaturally so. Its head was tilted to the side, staring directly at me, its eyes wide open but not blinking. It was an impossible stillness, like the world had forgotten it was ever alive. The skin of the figure was pale, almost translucent, and its lips were twisted into a smile that didn't match its hollow expression. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My brain was screaming at me to run, but my feet wouldn't obey. Then, from somewhere in the dark, I heard a whisper, a soft, raspy voice. like it was coming from inside my head. "Leave, now." I stumbled backward, but my foot hit something and I fell to the ground. The whisper grew louder, more desperate. "Leave, or you'll stay forever." I scrambled to my feet and ran. I didn't even look back. The hum intensified, becoming almost unbearable. I burst out of the room, slamming the door behind me, but even then, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was watching me. I ran back to my barracks, my mind spinning. I couldn't tell anyone what I had seen. They'd think I was crazy, or worse, they'd think I was a danger to the base. But I knew what I had felt. That thing, whatever it was, had been waiting for me. Since that night, I've tried to forget about room 23, but the more I try to push it out of my mind, the more it consumes me. I've heard rumors from other soldiers that the room is sealed up now, that it's been off limits to everyone. But when I pass by that hallway, I still hear the hum sometimes, faint and distant, as if it's calling me back. And every now and then, I'll see that figure again standing just at the edge of my vision, waiting, smiling. I don't know what's happening on this base. I don't know if it's something real or if I'm losing my mind. But there's one thing I'm sure of. Room 23 is still here, and it's waiting. I never thought much about the small, isolated military base I was assigned to after enlisting. Camp Aldridge on the edge of nowhere, tucked into the mountains. When I first arrived, it felt like the perfect place to start my career. Quiet, predictable, peaceful, even. The barracks were decent, the men were quiet and professional, and everything had that controlled military environment I had grown accustomed to. There were no distractions, no noise, just a place to focus, to work. But soon, things started to feel off. I didn't think it was anything at first, just the usual nerves of a new assignment. But the longer I stayed, the more I noticed little things. The way the officers would glance over their shoulders when passing certain hallways, the way they'd go silent when a certain building was mentioned, like they were afraid of something they didn't want to talk about. I was assigned to guard duty, a simple task. The night shifts were long and boring, but nothing I wasn't used to. Most of the time, I'd patrol the perimeter of the base, check the fences, keep an eye on the cameras, but there was one area I wasn't allowed to go near. Building 19. I wasn't given any reason why, just that it was off limits, especially at night. I didn't think much of it. Every base has its rules. But there was something about the way they told me. It wasn't just a standard don't go there kind of rule. It felt personal, like I was being warned. One evening, after a particularly long shift, I made the mistake of asking my sergeant about it. He gave me a long, hard look and just muttered, "It's for your own good." The next few nights, I found myself thinking about it constantly. Why was it off limits? What was in there? It wasn't like I hadn't seen military buildings before. Many of them were just storage rooms, or labs, or empty offices. But Building 19 felt different. There was an air of tension around it, like something was hidden in there, and I wanted to know what. So, one night, after the last shift ended and everyone was asleep, I decided to investigate. I made my way over to Building 19, careful not to be seen by the other guards. The building was older, the paint peeling from the walls, windows cracked and covered in grime. There was an oppressive silence that seemed to hang in the air, pressing down on me. I tried the door. It was locked, of course, but there was a small side window, partially open. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I squeezed through. Inside, the air was stale, like it hadn't been touched in years. The lights flickered weakly above me, casting long, creepy shadows. The place smelled of rust and something else. Something foul. But I couldn't stop. I had to know what was behind all the secrecy. I walked through the hallways, my boots echoing against the concrete floors. The walls were lined with old, abandoned equipment, nothing that looked particularly dangerous, but something about it felt wrong. The further I went, the more I could feel my skin crawling, like someone or something was watching me. Then I heard it. A faint sound, like a soft thumping, coming from deeper within the building. It was so quiet at first that I thought I was imagining it. But then it came again, louder this time. Thump, thump, thump. I froze. My heart started to race. I told myself it was just the building settling, just some old machinery still running. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The sound was getting closer. It was like footsteps, slow and heavy. I should have turned around and left, but curiosity pushed me forward. I followed the sound deeper, into the bowels of the building, down a narrow hallway that twisted and turned, as if the building itself were alive and leading me somewhere. Finally, I reached the end. There was a door solid, reinforced, with a small window that was dark and opaque. The thumping had stopped, but something else had replaced it, a low, guttural growl like an animal in pain. It was muffled, but it was clear enough for me to know it wasn't something I wanted to encounter. I pressed my ear to the door. The growling was louder now, mixed with the sound of something scraping against metal. I didn't know what it was, but I knew I shouldn't be there. My body screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't move. It was like the building had a hold on me, like it was pulling me in, dragging me closer to whatever was behind that door. Then, the growl stopped. Complete silence. I held my breath, waiting. Seconds stretched into minutes. But there was nothing. I turned the handle. It opened, just slightly, with a sharp creak that made me wince. I stepped inside. The room was pitch black, but I could make out a shape in the corner. Something hunched and twisted, not quite human, but not entirely animal. It was large, its body writhing in ways that defied logic, as if it were struggling against invisible restraints. It was covered in dark, mottled skin, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. The creature let out a low hiss, and its head snapped toward me with an unnatural speed. I backed away quickly, but my foot caught on something, a piece of debris, a pile of old crates. It tumbled to the floor with a deafening crash. The creature's eyes locked onto mine. It moved, fast, too fast for something that size. I scrambled backward, but the door slammed shut behind me. I was trapped. The creature let out a shriek, a sound that shouldn't come from anything living, and I felt the walls close in on me. I don't know how I escaped. I don't know if I actually did escape. The next thing I remember, I was outside, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked back at the building, but everything was quiet. No signs of the creature, no signs of anything. The next day, I was transferred off guard duty, and I haven't been back near Building 19 since. But every night, when the lights go out and the base falls silent, I feel the same thing creeping up on me. That feeling that I'm being watched, that something is still out there, waiting, watching. It's still there, I know it is. Somewhere in the dark corners of that base. And I don't think I'll ever be able to shake the feeling that it's following me. I joined the military for the usual reasons: steady paycheck, a sense of purpose, the chance to get away from my small town. When I got assigned to Fort Henderson, a remote outpost in the middle of nowhere, I didn't think much of it. It was just another base, one of many across the country. Nothing special, or so I thought. The first few days were fine. I unpacked my gear, met the other soldiers, and settled into the monotonous routine of life on base. It was isolated, sure, but that wasn't unusual for a military base. There were no distractions, no hustle and bustle, just long shifts, drills, and quiet nights. At first, I found the stillness comforting. But as time went on, I started to notice things. It was small at first, creaky floors in the barracks, a faint buzzing sound coming from the walls. Nothing to get worked up over. Then there were the whispers. No one ever mentioned it, but I began to hear them at night, soft voices drifting through the hallways, too faint to make out. I'd walk down the empty corridors, the lights flickering overhead, and feel like someone was following me. But whenever I turned around, there was no one there. One evening, after a long day of drills, I was sitting in the common area, trying to relax. I noticed Sergeant Grady, a man who had been stationed here longer than I had, sitting by himself in the corner, staring at the wall. His face was drawn, pale. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "You all right?" I asked, trying to break the silence. He didn't respond immediately. He just kept staring ahead, his eyes wide, like he was seeing something I couldn't. Finally, he looked up at me, his voice barely above a whisper. "Don't go near the radio room after dark," he said. His gaze flickered to the door as if something was about to come through it. "You're better off not knowing." I was about to ask him what he meant, but he stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair in the process. Without a word, he hurried out of the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I tried to brush it off, but the warning stuck with me. The next night, after my shift, curiosity got the better of me. I'd heard rumors about the radio room, how the communications officers were sometimes picked up on strange signals, static that didn't make sense, even voices from places they couldn't identify. But most of us dismissed it as superstition, a way to pass the time in the slow, lonely days on base. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I found myself walking down to the radio room after hours, as quietly as I could. The lights in the hallway flickered above me, the buzzing growing louder as I drew closer. I reached the door to the radio room and stood there for a moment, my hand on the handle. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe just an empty room, a couple of old radios, nothing sinister. But when I opened the door, the air hit me like a cold wave. It was freezing inside, much colder than the rest of the base. The room was dimly lit, the glow from the equipment casting long shadows. The radio equipment was old, the buttons worn from years of use, but it was still functional, at least. I assumed it was. The strange thing was, the radio was on. The static was deafening, like a hiss of white noise filling the room. But there was something else, too, something I couldn't quite make out at first. It sounded like words buried under the static. Soft, unintelligible, but unmistakably there. I leaned in closer to the speaker, my heart pounding in my chest. And then, I heard it clearly. "Help us." The voice was faint but unmistakable. I jumped back from the radio, my blood running cold. I told myself it was just a recording, some glitch in the system, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The message was too real, too human. The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in on me. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind me, the noise so loud it made me jump. I spun around, my breath coming faster now, my pulse racing. The air was thick, suffocating. The buzzing from the radios grew louder, and the voices, those same soft, desperate voices, came again, this time clearer. "Help us. Trapped." I stumbled backward, panic setting in. What was happening? What was this? I reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. It was like it was locked from the outside, no matter how much I pulled. The voices were growing louder now, more urgent. "Get out, before they come." I turned around, my eyes wide with terror, looking for any way out. But the room wasn't the same anymore. The walls seemed to be shifting, bending in on themselves. The equipment around me flickered and sparked, and the coldness was suffocating, pressing in on me from all sides. Then I saw it, a figure in the corner, standing just beyond the light. I froze. It was a soldier, I thought, but something about him was wrong. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, dark shadows beneath them. He stood perfectly still, staring at me with an empty, hollow gaze. "Who are you?" I managed to croak, my voice barely audible over the static. The figure didn't respond. It just continued to stare. And for a moment, I thought I saw its lips move, but no sound came out. The room seemed to grow colder still, the lights flickering violently. I backed away slowly, still trying to open the door, my hands shaking with fear. And then, suddenly, everything went silent. The buzzing stopped, the voices stopped, the figure was gone. I don't remember how I managed to leave the room. All I know is that I ran, faster than I'd ever run in my life, straight back to my barracks. When I got there, I locked the door behind me and collapsed onto my bed, shaking uncontrollably. The next morning, I tried to tell anyone what happened, but when I returned to the radio room, it was like nothing had ever been there. The radio was off, the room empty, and no one else seemed to notice anything unusual. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw. And that thing in the corner, it's still with me. I feel it, watching me every time I close my eyes. I don't know what happened in that room, but I know I can never go back. And I'm not the only one who's been hearing those voices. Others have too, they just don't talk about it. But sometimes, late at night, when the air is thick and the bass is quiet, I hear the static and the voices calling. And I know whatever it is that's trapped in that room, it's still here. I never thought I'd end up at Fort Rowell, a place so isolated that the nearest town was a 3-hour drive away. I'd been in the military long enough to know that some assignments were remote, but this one felt different. It wasn't just the isolation, it was the way the base itself felt. Like it was abandoned long ago, but somehow, someone still kept the lights on, and maybe they shouldn't have. When I first arrived, everything seemed fine. The barracks were functional, if a little rundown, and the other soldiers were friendly enough. The daily routine was the same: wake up, roll call, drills, and then back to the barracks at night. The base was small, but everything was in its place. I didn't question it, and I figured I'd just do my time and move on. But the longer I stayed, the more uneasy I became. There were little things at first: lights flickering in the hallways, the occasional hum of machinery when everything should have been quiet. It was easy to ignore at first, but then there were the sounds. At night, when the rest of the base was supposed to be sleeping, I started hearing soft footsteps in the corridors. The kind of footsteps that were always just behind you, but when you turned around, no one was there. I asked one of the other soldiers, Daniels, about it. He shrugged and gave me a tight smile. Base has a way of messing with your head. Old buildings, old wiring, you get used to it. But the more I thought about it, the more his words didn't sit right with me. There was something off, like the place was alive, or at least pretending to be. I tried to shake it off and focused on my duties. One night, I was assigned to the late shift at the communications tower. It was a small structure on the edge of the base, built for maintaining radio contact with higher command. The building was remote enough that there was always a sense of isolation when you worked there. It was quiet, too quiet. But that night, it was different. Around midnight, I heard something strange over the radio. It was static at first, then a low voice, too faint to make out the words. It wasn't a signal I recognized. I leaned in, adjusting the dials, but the voice remained distorted. My gut twisted. I picked up the receiver, trying to clear the interference. "This is Fort Rowell. Do you copy?" I said into the mic. No response. I tried again. "Hello? Can anyone hear me?" A low, distorted laugh came through the speakers. I froze. It wasn't like any voice I'd ever heard. It was hollow, like it was coming from far away, like the sound of a voice from beyond a wall. My skin crawled. And then the lights in the tower flickered. I quickly turned to check the power grid, but the meters were steady. Still, the lights continued to flicker. The air around me felt thick, heavy. It was like the temperature had dropped, and every movement felt sluggish. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it around the small room. That's when I noticed it, something out of place. The door to the storage closet was ajar, but there was no reason for it to be. I never opened it during my shift. I stood there for a long moment, staring at it, feeling a strange pull toward it. Every instinct in my body told me to stay away, but something pushed me forward. I slowly approached, the flashlight beam shaking in my hand. When I opened the door, the room was empty except for the strange smell of dust and something else. Something metallic. The kind of smell you get when you're too close to old machinery, but sharper, somehow. And then, the lights went out. Total darkness. The hum of the radio equipment stopped. The silence was overwhelming. My breathing echoed in the room, and I fumbled for the flashlight, turning it on again. I swept it around the room in panicked motions. Nothing. I started moving back toward the door, but just as I reached for the handle, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere deeper in the tower. I froze. They weren't the sounds of someone walking. They were dragging. The slow scrape of boots on concrete, like something or someone was too heavy to walk normally. I swung the door open, rushing out into the hallway. The lights in the tower flickered back on just as I stepped into the corridor, but the feeling of dread didn't leave. The footsteps followed, echoing through the hall, growing closer. I turned to run, but the hallway seemed to stretch on forever, the walls narrowing, the air becoming thicker with each step I took. I wasn't alone. I bolted for the main entrance, my heart pounding in my chest. When I burst through the door, I was met by a blast of cold air. The night was still and quiet, the kind of silence that felt unnatural. The base was different now. There was something in the air, a suffocating heaviness, and the once familiar buildings loomed ominously in the distance. It was like I could feel eyes on me, watching from the shadows, waiting for me to make a mistake. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know what I saw or what followed me. I tried to report it, but no one would listen. They just chalked it up to fatigue, too much time on my own, the isolation getting to my head. They reassigned me to regular patrols after that, but the unease didn't fade. The sense of being watched, of something just behind me, never left. And the worst part? The radio tower was silent after that night. No static, no voices, just the low hum of the equipment, like everything was working perfectly, like nothing had happened at all. I don't go near that tower anymore. I don't go anywhere near the dark corners of the base. Every time I pass the storage closet in the communications building, I feel that same pull, that same oppressive weight. And now, every night, when the lights flicker and the hum of the machines fills the air, I wonder if it's waiting again, if it's always been waiting. I don't know what it is. I don't know what I heard or what's hiding in the shadows of this base, but I'm sure of one thing: it's not over. I don't think I've ever been more uncomfortable in my life than I was when I was stationed at Fort Hawthorne. It was one of those places that nobody talked about. It wasn't exactly top secret, but there was this strange air of hush-hush around it, like they were hiding something from us. And maybe, after what I experienced there, they were. It looked normal at first. Just another old military base in the middle of nowhere, tucked between two mountain ranges. There were the usual facilities, barracks, chow halls, an admin building. The base was small, just a handful of soldiers stationed there at any given time, and there were barely any civilians around. It was isolated, but it wasn't like I hadn't been stationed in isolated places before. I was used to the silence, the solitude. The first few days were routine: early mornings, long hours of training, and even longer nights. Everything seemed normal, until I started noticing the little things. The weird sounds at night, like footsteps that echoed down the hallways when nobody was around. The flickering lights that never seemed to stay steady for more than a few minutes. And the shadows. I'm not a superstitious guy, but there were moments when I'd swear I saw something move out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing there. But I shrugged it off. New places always take some getting used to, right? One evening, I was assigned to guard duty. It was supposed to be a quiet shift, just me and the empty base. The rest of the crew was off doing whatever they did on their time off. So, I grabbed my flashlight and walked the perimeter of the base, just making sure everything was secure. That's when I first noticed it, the building at the far end of the base. I'd seen it before, of course, but I'd never really paid attention to it. It was just another old structure. But tonight it looked different, like something was pulling me toward it. It was a storage building, maybe, or a maintenance facility, but the door was slightly ajar. I didn't think much of it, but that little gap caught my attention. I stepped toward it, the gravel crunching under my boots. As I got closer, I noticed the door wasn't just ajar, it was hanging crookedly, like someone had forced it open but never bothered to close it. I paused, wondering if I should check it out or just report it. Protocol said I should lock it up, but something about that door gave me a chill. Curiosity got the best of me. I pushed it open. The inside of the building was dark. No surprise there, given the lack of power in this part of the base. But there was something wrong about the air in there. It was cold, unnaturally so. I'd been outside in the chill of night, and this felt deeper, like the cold was coming from inside the walls. I took a few steps in, my flashlight sweeping across the room. The beam of light flickered as I moved, but I could still make out the shadows of old crates and equipment that seemed to have been left in haste. There was a musty smell to the place, like mildew and metal. But then there was something else, a faint odor, something almost metallic, like blood. I started to feel uneasy. I moved further into the building, scanning the area with my light, but the beam kept bouncing around, like the shadows were shifting in the corners. My instincts told me to turn around and leave, but my legs wouldn't move. Then I heard it, a soft, scraping sound like metal dragging across the floor. I froze, my heart pounding. The sound came again, closer this time. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely more than a whisper, afraid to disturb the silence. No response. Just the dragging sound, like something or someone was moving in the dark. I clicked on the radio at my belt, my fingers trembling as I tried to reach out to anyone else on the base. "This is Guard 3. I've got something weird going on. I need backup." I waited, but there was no response. I checked the radio again, still nothing. I moved toward the sound, the scraping growing louder now. My flashlight caught on something, a pair of boots, standing still in the corner of the room. I blinked, thinking I was imagining it, but when I looked again, they were still there. The boots were caked in dirt, covered in what looked like dried mud or something worse. I backed away slowly, my breath quickening. That's when I saw it, a shape, dark and contorted, crouching on the floor behind the crates. It looked like a person, but wrong. The way it moved wasn't natural. It didn't walk, it crawled, dragging its limbs across the ground in a way that made my stomach turn. I could hear the faint sound of someone breathing, low and rasping. And then I heard a voice. It was soft, barely audible, but it was unmistakable. "Help me." I felt my pulse spike. This wasn't some wild animal or a soldier messing with me. Whatever this was, it wasn't human. I turned to run, but I tripped over something, another boot, or a pile of rags, and hit the floor hard. I scrambled to get up, but before I could, I felt something cold, clammy, and rough brush across my arm. I screamed, pushing myself away, only to slam into something even colder. I looked up and saw it right in front of me, its face pale and twisted, hollow eyes staring down at me. I don't know how I got out of that room. All I remember is running. Running so fast that I nearly collapsed when I reached the barracks. I threw myself into my room and locked the door. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I told my superior what had happened. He just stared at me like I was crazy. "It's an old building," he said. "Old equipment. Probably a rat or something. You've been working too hard. Get some rest." But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. The base isn't just old. It's hiding something that shouldn't be there. I haven't been back to that building since. And every time I walk past it now, I feel that same chill, the feeling that something's waiting in the dark, watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I still hear the scraping sometimes when I walk the perimeter, late at night. And sometimes, if I listen closely, I hear the whispering, "Help me."